And I'll just orient everyone, you know, the chat box is open. And so as we go through, you know, you might even right now just type in a little like, hi, welcome from, or hello from wherever you are. So we can
Yeah,
just kind of
where are
say
you
hello.
from? That's my favorite. Where are you from? Hello. And yes, if you have questions, because Kathryn and I are just kind of assuming what questions people might have that have signed up for the training. From Denver. That's you. I was like,
That's me.
someone else is there. I was like, you guys can be great friends. Yeah, so as questions come up just about DBT or training in DBT in general, go ahead and put them in there. And as I'm talking, Kathryn can try and field questions to me, and then same vice versa. Jess is in Georgia. I'm pretty sure I know this Jess. Hello, Jess. I should put myself in here too. Nicole's in West Defford. Do I know you too, Nicole?
From New York, welcome, Nina.
New York, not far. There are some people I know that signed up that are not going to be attending live, but are very far away. I saw one of my supervisees who is in Saudi Arabia, so she might win the distance, the distance game. Ah, that's how you're familiar. Nice. Awesome.
Nice.
All right, well, it's 2 o'clock. So in true DBT fashion, we will start right on time, right? Because this is a thing. Hi, Dina. Okay. So thanks to everyone who's here. I'm sure more people are going to trickle in. And like I said, there's plenty of people who couldn't make it live, but we will send out a recording of this so that way everyone can catch the replay of it. So we wanted to just start out by telling you guys a little bit about ourselves, how we got into DBT and our training and things like that that have led us here. And then we're going to go through a couple of different talking points. We'll take questions. If you didn't hear us at the beginning, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them. And then we've got some fun stuff to talk about at the end, as well as a giveaway to make it very exciting. So with that being said, Kathryn, why don't we start with you? Do you want to tell us about just how you got into DBT, what you're doing, and start from there?
Yeah. Well, I'll start from what I'm doing. So I am here in Denver, Colorado, sunny Denver, Colorado, at least for today. And I have a private practice here where I run a DBT program, and I have, I started up a consultation team that's a remote team. So we all meet online, and that's been about 5 years now. There's 5 of us, and it's a fabulous team. So I'm doing DBT here, but my background, I moved here about 5 years ago from Portland, Oregon, where I was the clinic operations manager there at the Portland DBT Institute. That's really where I got most of my training. But, you know, the question of like, how did I get into DBT? I would just say starts a lot, you know, further back. When I was in grad school, I started having some interest, and I was in a field placement where they didn't do DBT, but I had a small group of clinicians that was, they were sort of interested in it and wondering if it would work in their setting. And so we kind of I joined into their little study group about mindfulness, and it just made so much sense to me. And it was kind of my first introduction to real mindfulness. And so I thought, oh, well, if DBT does mindfulness, I must be interested in that. And I had some other reasons that I'll talk about a little bit later why I was kind of interested in doing DBT, but that's sort of where I got started. And then, you know, moved into a community mental health center after graduation, that I got my toes into actually doing some DBT work more formally and starting some groups. But it was at Portland DBT Institute where I got most of my training and really established this as kind of my main modality, and have been in it and never looked back ever since. So
yeah, when did you start your, like, when you talk about getting your toes dipped in, like, when do you feel like you started doing DBT work? Like, what year was it?
Probably 2007 or 8, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I was at a community mental health center that really, you know, they have since, I think, done a little bit more, but they didn't have any infrastructure for a DBT program. But myself and another colleague had known a little bit about it and had done some self-study and like very brief introductions in grad school as I had. And so she and I just decided, you know, we had a population of people that really needed it there. And we were in a very rural area in Tillamook, Oregon, that just didn't have really much of anything other than our little community mental health center. So we just kind of like flew by the seat of our pants, figuring it out one step at a time,
Yeah.
which was, you know, challenging. And also like it just kind of naturally progressed from there for me.
Yeah. I kind of found it in a similar way. It's interesting because in ways, I don't want to say this, but like it really found me, and I don't know how else to say it. But in 2009, I had gotten my first job after graduating with my bachelor's in psych. And so I was going into grad school and I wanted to be doing work immediately. And so I got a job at a adolescent group home. And that was the first time that I heard about DBT. And it's so funny in like this very precious way to think about then. And same thing, like we didn't have the resources really to get trained, so we were just kind of like reading the book and trying to do the best that we could for these kids who really needed DBT. They were self-harming. They had there were like the kids and the teens who were getting basically like rejected from all of their treatment places. Like this is where they ended up, and they weren't safe enough to be at home and in their community. And so when I think now of what we were trying then, like we were really doing the best we can, and that was not the most adherent practice that one would imagine or hope for. But we were doing a lot of trying to figure it out on our own, and that was the first time I learned about DBT. And then years later, after I became licensed, I got a job at a partial hospitalization program that specialized in women with trauma, and we had a DBT specific track. And then that's where I got my formal training in DBT, and then started applying it into not different populations, in different treatment settings. So I went from residential to partial. And then what happened was we were discharging a lot of women who were doing really well in partial with DBT, and there was nowhere to send them. And somebody said on the phone to me when I was like looking for providers, I need a group for this person, like they would really do well with it. And I found this person in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and she said, Shaelene, I drive an hour away to get here because you guys don't have anything here. Like I don't live around here. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this myself. And so that's where I started offering DBT outpatient. And then fast forward to now, I have a big old group practice in South Jersey, and I just love my team. They're all really amazing. And now we do comprehensive DBT outpatient for pretty much teens and adults. So that's what got me here.
I think it's interesting you say like it found you, because one of the things that I feel like is really relevant is just the way in which I think a lot of what is needed in the mental health field has to do with things like mindfulness, validation, really wise change strategies. These are all things that are built into our inherent parts of dialectical behavior therapy, that they're parts of lots of different treatments as well. But DBT has sort of a very unique mix of like being very scientific, very precise, and also like utilizing all of these technologies of acceptance and mindfulness in just a little tapestry that is, I think, pretty unique. And I think when you think about it finding you versus you finding it as your treatment modality, it's just so much what's needed for so many clients, that as you're kind of going about your work, I feel like so many people, and many of you that are here joining us, may have this experience where it's like you're working with people and there's just something needed. It may be that it's like more precision in your change strategies, or it may be that like, man, this person has really intense emotions and doesn't trust them, and I just need to like help myself figure out how do I become a more validating presence for this person. But it's sort of like the need for it becomes known, and then you find yourself in a place like this where you're like, maybe I need to get a little more training in this area. So
yeah, and I think too, you know, when you're out there working with people and you're helping people and you're doing such hard work, there's a lot of times where, and you know, this still happens. It doesn't go away once you learn DBT, but there are a lot of times where you're like, what am I doing? Like, how in the world do I help this person? Give me a map, give me something. And, you know, there are pros and cons to the idea of like, here's the guidebook and here's how it looks. But I do think DBT, and the person who created DBT, Marsha Linehan, she did a really nice job of finding a way to say, these are the things that you have to do. And yet you have to find the way to do them that make the most sense to you. They have to be driven by the principles that drive them. And so I think like working in populations where people are self-harming, when there's a lot of emotion dysregulation, when there's just crisis after crisis after crisis, and there's no feeling of stability, when people, you know, when their lives feel so tumultuous that the best answer that they can think of is, you know what, I think I might kill myself. I think that might be the best thing. That is such stressful work for the therapist. And I think DBT does a really nice way to say, like, here are the things that you do when these things are happening, in a way that's also really just loving and beautiful. Like when you're talking about the wisdom of it and the mindfulness behind it and the validation that supports the entire treatment. There are a lot of different pieces that I think a lot of people don't know about. Like they hear DBT and they think it, you know, maybe that it's rigid, or that it has a lot of rules to follow and things like that. And I think the nature of dialectics really adds something to DBT that a lot of other modalities don't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with all of that being said, let's talk a little bit about training, because I'm sure a lot of people are, you know, they're here because they have some interest in DBT. And one of the things that we're focusing on today is, why should someone get trained in it? And not only why should someone get trained, but how do you pursue getting trained? One of the things that Kathryn and I were talking about is how when we were first learning DBT, there was a lot of just like reading and trying to figure things out on your own. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, Kathryn, just how important it is to get quality training, and what does that even look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think I will speak to that. I'm going to share a little screen here because I want to draw something as I talk. But my experience is all of the learning is really important learning and valuable learning, right? So I'll just tell my story. You know, as I said, I started out in graduate school with a little bit of interest in mindfulness. And so early on in my career, my learning curve was kind of like this slow increase of like, oh, there's this thing about mindfulness. And then I went into this community mental health practice where I started actually studying the skill manual. And then I had a little bit more of a growth, right? Like kind of another little increase in my understanding of DBT, not just as where mindfulness was showing up, but also now like there's this whole set of skills for emotion regulation and interpersonal effectiveness. So I had another little growth, and then I just kind of plateaued for a little bit, right? So there was sort of this early learning where I'm reading and I'm like engaged in some ways that were just mostly driven by what I knew my clients needed. And I could teach myself or get, through close colleagues. But that didn't get me like super far. And then I went to work at Portland DBT Institute. And one of the first things you have to do, and I'm sure most of you who maybe have looked into or maybe are working at DBT clinics, is you have to get a foundational level of training. And it's kind of like this. The learning curve is steep. So all of a sudden it's just like, there's a ton of knowledge where you start to understand not just some of the little bits of the treatment that are really important and useful, but also the infrastructure that holds it together. So that was the first time that I really understood what the different stages of treatment really were about, why they were important. I started to understand how to target, or like even what targets were and how to organize them into a hierarchy. I started understanding the course of treatment and all these things that suddenly, instead of it being sort of this amorphous, like clearly useful, lots of good ideas, but just kind of cloud of information, when I went through that foundational level of training, it was like I had this whole infrastructure underneath that supported all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
And it was a steep curve, right? So there was, even for me, I think there was a lot of like unlearning, because I had some ideas about DBT that weren't all accurate, some kind of rigidity around it that I had to let go of. So there was sort of this period where it was like, okay, so I'm learning a ton of stuff and I'm also leaving a bunch of stuff behind. And so it was like kind of climbing this little bit of a mountain. And then I would say I also went through another little plateau where it's like, okay, I kind of got this, like I'm rolling with it and I'm doing good with my clients. Things are kind of moving along, but it wasn't like all like new and fresh and stuff. And then I will just say I went through another period where I started actually reviewing tapes with a colleague. And that was, again, a very steep learning curve where it's like, okay, so I had all this infrastructure. So I really understood like where things went in the treatment, what their place was, how they functioned, right? And then I was able to go and do it. And then I was doing it, and I would find like I'd get into stuck spots or something. And I would have a colleague look at my tape and they would say, hey, you think you're doing this, but it sounds like that. Like when they're watching my tape, there's things, these little subtle things that I was like, oh yeah, like I'm actually really needing to improve this strategy, or I see now where that strategy would have been useful. And I just like couldn't quite see it all until I got this big picture. So there's another, big spike. And it's just, I feel like my career's kind of been like this, where it's like you're kind of always learning more because it never ends. And meaning that there's just like even within DBT, it's ever evolving. I mean, this is the beauty of it, right? So dialectics, I don't know how many of you know what a dialectic is, but DBT stands for dialectical behavior therapy. And a dialectic is where you can have two opposing realities or ideas or proposals or whatever that are both true and valid at the same time. And
even if in conflict, like, so even if they're opposing, which is the real, for me, like that feels really special about that usually, it's really easy to get stuck, whether it's with a client or whether it's like a conversation at your dinner table with your family, and being able to come back to the dialectic and see both sides, like to be able to find kernels of truth in both of those oppositions. This is the idea of it.
yes, that's exactly it. And I think it's so when I just said like we're kind of on this always learning, always evolving growth pattern, I guess you could call it. There's a reality here that like DBT has been researched, and there's been iteration after iteration after iteration of looking at different parts of the treatment as well as the treatment as a whole to establish a base of evidence to say, hey, this is very effective for certain populations of people. So we sort of on one side say, you can learn DBT because there's a book that's got a beginning and an end, a manual to it, and there is a set of skills and you can learn it, right? And then that that treatment, and you can operate with all of the evidence that supports it. And then there's the other side that says actually like the whole world is always changing and the treatment's always evolving too, and new information is coming out, and we understand why certain things work and why they don't, or things like that in new different ways, and there's nuances constantly. So that's the beauty of it, is that you can kind of learn everything there is to learn, and then there's more to learn. And then, you kind of get like really confident and you feel like you've got a level of competence that's, that feels good in a career. Like you want to have that. And then you like tweak it and you start to learn more and you get more nuanced. And so it's been a really fun experience for me. Like the aspect of training is like actually just constant growth, not just for, my clients and their benefit, also for my own sort of like professional satisfaction. So yeah, what about you, Shaelene? What's your experience been like with this?
It's funny because you draw this and it's going up, and as you were talking, I was thinking about how I met you. So I met Kathryn in a training, and Kathryn, I think you were co-leading with Kelly Kerner, who's just, there will be names you hear in DBT, and Kelly Kerner is one of them that you just get excited and you love
you hear her name and you feel loved. That's
you
my
really
experience.
do. You really, really do. She's an excellent trainer in DBT. And so I signed up for one of Kelly's courses. And when I say trainer, like, like Kathryn was saying, you learn the foundational is like the entree, but then there's all of these other parts that are still required in a dinner. Like you need silverware and you need cups and you need a biscuit on the side or whatever it is. And so there are all of these other parts that make DBT an entire like meal and experience. And so Kelly had put on so many great trainings that were like these other pieces to complement and really support and move the plate of work that you had in front of you, that like you could understand, but sometimes just really got stuck with and didn't know, like, okay, well, I always think of it like the art of doing DBT. I know the words, but how do I actually do it and put it in motion? So Kelly would put on great trainings, and she put on a training once, and Kathryn was facilitating the training with her. And that's when I started contacting Kathryn, and she started supervising me to watch my tapes. And so when you're drawing your uptrend and the plateau, and when you said you started taping and there was another up curve, I was thinking of how I would have framed that for myself. I had my foundational training, and at the place that I used to work at, I was really seen as the DBT person. I was head of the intensive team, and our site, our program was really big, and our program had 5 different sites. And so I was like the DBT person at the top of that line, right? And so when I left to do my own work and I started pursuing certification, I had reached out to Kathryn because I wanted help with making sure my sessions were adherent. But by this point, I was like, I am so good. Like, I know DBT, and not in like a cocky way, but like I really believed that. I was like, I'm good. I've really got this. And then Kathryn started coding my tapes, and at the time it felt like a dip, not like a learning curve. It was a huge learning curve, but in my mind it was like, whoa, there is so much that I don't know. And at this point, I had been doing DBT in some sort of way for about 7 years. And it was amazing to me how much more there was to still learn. And so I would say the same when I started getting my tapes reviewed, and getting some solid supervision ongoing. I really started to understand so many things changed. Not only did I learn more about DBT, but my patients were getting better. My competency was going up. And because of all of that, I felt much less burnt out, because instead of just feeling like at the end of the day, not every day, but like certain times when you're not feeling competent as a therapist, it's incredibly difficult to serve your population, especially when your population feels like it's on fire a lot of the time, right? In DBT, the first stage of treatment, the stage 1, is often referred to as hell, being in the basement of the house, and it's hot and it's fiery, and we've got to get out of there as soon as possible, and everything is an emergency. And so when that's the caseload and that's the people that you're helping, they desperately need your help. And it's incredibly hard to know what to do when it feels like there's an emergency a lot of the time, and somebody's life is at stake. Like, there are so many different factors. And so I think that those learning curves continue to present themselves. And I think some people might find that really intimidating when they think about getting trained in DBT. It feels like you're signing up, like you just finished school and you got your license and you're like, okay, I'm ready to help the world. But then you find out about DBT, and if you choose to go down the path of getting trained, you're really signing up for a lot more learning than you ever thought you would.
But I just want to say with that, I think of it as sort of like climbing a mountain, and it's like, well, this is a mountain that actually never has an end, but it's also a mountain that has the most beautiful views, and it's
Yes.
just so nice to walk. Like, I'll just say, in terms of like the DBT community, of clinicians, we were just talking about, like, there's names in the field, and they're just people that they embody compassion, they embody hope, they embody, like, deep acceptance and love. They understand, at least, of course, not everybody. There's just like, it's a community like everywhere else. You're going to have,
Sure.
but there are people that, in my experience, that it's like so pleasant to walk up the mountain with. It's
Yeah.
like you get colleagues that really care about the work they do, that want to have high levels of expertise, that really do want to be able to help in the most difficult places to help. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, so the walk is worth it.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of saying it, for sure. And I do feel that every time I go to a training, there's somewhere in the story that one of the trainers is telling, where you just have that moment where you feel, oh, we're together still. I don't know you personally and I haven't met you, but you as a DBT therapist, you know the kind of work that I do, and I understand the work that you do. And I'm so glad that you do it. And I'm so glad that you're a part of this community. And I don't really know that I don't know that that's in other modalities as much. I'm sure there are elements of that, but there is this way in which DBT, I think part of it is the fact that you have to be practicing what you're preaching in order for it to be working, and in order for it to be real DBT. And so it's really cool to go, to the other side of the world and talk to somebody who's doing DBT, and you just know right where to pick up, and you kind of get the lingo and the language of one another because you're both really living that.
I would add to that too. So I don't know how many of you all our attendees here know. So Marsha Linehan, she's the woman that developed this treatment. She created it out of her own experience, and she recently published her own memoir, and it's called Building a Life Worth Living. But one of the things that she just says over and over and over again in the book is like her whole goal was to go into hell and help people find their way out. To like meet them there. And I think that's true. Like, I think about that with all of my clients, like, how do I get into their hell with them so I can help them come out? And then I think of it with my colleagues, like how many of my team members,
Mm.
you, Shaelene, like where we together are figuring out how do we get into the thick of it with our clients to really understand it and find our way out. It's a very connecting experience, painful at times, but really like beautiful at the end of the day, because it helps us understand our own like human experience at a whole other level, and it's really quite powerful.
Yes. So I know people that are here on the call and those that are going to be watching are considering DBT as a training in terms of where to go next with their modality. And I think in terms of time, money, which are two very valuable things, there's a lot that goes into deciding to get trained in whatever there is out there. And, you know, being a therapist, once you're licensed, other than, keeping up with your continuing education credits, which you can sometimes get for free or just kind of get on the fly or read through or whatever, there's not really any there's not really any requirements that say you must go then pick something and then dedicate yourself to it and become really good at it so you can specialize in what you do and help the people that you help, right? And so I'm wondering for you, Kathryn, what was it that made you decide to move forward on this long journey that you've been on? And what made you decide to get trained in DBT, especially over other modalities that are out there?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the first or that last part, like over other modalities. I think there's a way in which when I first started learning about DBT and understanding its role at like in the smorgasbord of lots of different
All the
evidence-based
options.
practices that
Yeah.
existed. I think I was drawn to it partially just because I really have always had the like desire to be like, where is it the most difficult? Where is the most like where the people that are going to be suffering the most or have the most pain? And I think, people who are chronically suicidal and self-harming and have severe emotion dysregulation, like those are my people. Those are the people I want to help, and I want to be at their at the table with them. And so I think I was drawn to it in that way. In terms of like which modality, it was more just the population. But I think later, as I've been practicing and have been out there, I think what I love about this modality as opposed to others is the way in which it encompasses so much, right? So you have dialectical behavior therapy, it has its structure, it has it's got its protocols and all of its strategies and all of those things, but it's sort of like this umbrella, and within it is contained it can contain a lot of other treatments. So I am finding myself one day, I mean, even just in one clinical day with my clients who are all in DBT, I might have one session where I'm really focusing on behavioral activation, and another session where I'm doing a lot more exposure, whether that's informal exposure response prevention, or I'm doing prolonged exposure with